this is what you should do. And then I added 3 or 4 more layers of that. What that's going to do, like you said, it's going to train someone, but it's also just going to make those feelings of anger get buried down deep below. And I think one of the things we really, as people, have to do better about is finding cathartic and healing ways to get past our emotions versus, like, I think so many of us are taught to just bury it down below and let it fester. So that's
Yeah.
some insight.
What if the truth came in a gel cap and we could just pop it in our mouths and forget about it? Well, it doesn't, and we can't. But we can laugh in the face of reality while plotting our survival. Welcome to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I am your host, Hersh, and if my guests can handle the truth, so can you. Open wide, folks. Here it comes.
Welcome to a very special edition of the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I've been blessed with seasonal allergies that allow my voice to take on a hushed tone, and it's going to make our conversation today even more intimate. My guest is Thomas R. Wilson. He's a professional advocate, writer, consultant, business owner, and sensory-friendly event specialist, which makes sense because now I'm using a very soft, dulcet tone. His work centered around an empathic and person-first mindset, and that works to empower and uplift community voices. And his work is inspired by his own personal experiences within his life as a member of the neurodiverse and mental health community. It is an absolute pleasure to see you again, Thomas, and welcome to Truth Tastes Funny.
Thank you for having me on.
It's great to have you. Now, you have, for those watching on video, you have a beautiful kind of wintry background. Tell me about the background that's going on there.
So this is inspired by Colorado, where I live, but I actually made this. So this is a design that I made. One of my works that I'm trying to get going a little bit more is creating sensory-friendly posters and art pieces that are meant to kind of elicit a feeling of calm and being in nature and having like quiet winds go throughout. And I've been doing this for a little while. And not that long ago, I said, you know what? I have a program that can make virtual backgrounds. And I uploaded this one, and it's one of my favorites that I've done for the backgrounds, but I do a wide variety of other ones.
Right. See, I knew there was something to it. Someone else might have just looked at it and said, okay, it's a beautiful background, but it has a story behind it, as do we all. Tell us a little of your story. Give us a little of your story.
Definitely. So I'll try to add a little bit of depending on who I'm talking to, I always change it up a little bit. But so oh my gosh, I have loved stories ever since I was probably 2, 3 years old. That was one of my favorite activities I would do with my family. My mom and my dad were really big on stories and would read to me. I've been told my entire life that I would giggle, I would laugh, I would ask questions. And I've always been an inquisitive individual. Some would also say industrious, other things. But I always remember the point in my life where my life kind of took a very significant change. I remember in school years, I learned very quickly why I did not like school, but I also learned that I wasn't being taught the way that I really wanted to be taught in school. I had questions, I would ask questions, and I was often told, you're asking too many questions. We have to move on. Well, right about the time I was 8, I suffered a significant loss in my life. I went from someone who would ask a lot of questions and was considered essentially an extremely gifted individual. I had the IQ of a 40-year-old at the age of 8 or younger. But after this loss, I had 2 major things that really happened. One, my mental illness kicked in. And the other one was, because of that, I very much lost interest in the school system. And because of that, I went from this gifted, highly educated youth to essentially what my teachers would tell me was a problem, or me raising my hands would be viewed as disruptive because I didn't necessarily follow those things. And at that age, one of my personal lessons I learned very quickly is when you're struggling with things, even just as a kid, communication is really hard. We're not often taught, many youth today are not often taught how to communicate when upset. We pick up on little bits of anger and we communicate that. Many families have that is taught. I'm not blaming the families for that. But as soon as that started happening, I realized that people were viewing me one way, but I was genuinely trying to communicate what I needed and wanted. It was just seen as disruptive. And that was the case for much of my high school and college experience. To paint a couple pictures really quickly, my elementary fifth grade teacher told me I was going to end up in jail and that I was a monster. And then I had a teacher who took a disliking to me in middle school and very much tried to get me in some substantial trouble. The school themselves had to tell him to back down because he was in the wrong. But a couple things I've also always known about myself is if you tell me I can't do something, my gut response is I'm going to be like, I'm going to do it. Watch me. But I also have a very strong will and a very strong sense of empathy. So when I got into college, I learned very quickly that I wanted to help people. I wanted to write. I wanted to tell stories. But also, as I got older, I ended up as a reading tutor in the school system near me. I ended up as a day program provider. And about 12 years ago, I found, I believe, one of the things that I was meant to do, which was to mentor and to help with youth and people who needed communication advocacy, helping develop that. And in 2021, I finally pursued that joy, that dream of becoming a storyteller, opened my business in December of that year. And I always like to say, since then, it's kind of been this massive blur because the success that I've achieved, the people that I've met, the goals, the like dedication to my work, it seems like in some moments it is this very quick blur, but at the same time, I also realize I put astronomical amount of hours and effort and care, not just for my work, but to also for all those youth that are, all those adults, all those people who are going through systems that are supposed to work for them, supposed to help them, but view them as problematic or too destructive or ask too many questions. And it really is my goal of my work to make sure that no one, no matter the age, is never called a monster, is never called the problem child, and really understands that arts and public speaking and writing and all these beautiful things in the world are designed for us to live our best life.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, but it's great stuff. And it's, I'll go back to one of the first things that you were saying, which is that there is not enough attention paid to communication skills. One of the things that I remember learning as a young parent was, when a child is in the throes of a tantrum or an episode, it's best not to try to intercede at that moment because they're not going to respond well to the intercession. And there's logic to that. But at the same time, there was never in school, like, and this goes for any child, because the whole idea of children conforming is it's like a premature, prison sentence. It's like sending a child to prison earlier than they need to go. And then like when the child gets out of, middle school, high school, college, whatever, then they're supposed to finally conform if they haven't conformed yet. But conformity is like, makes everybody's life easier, right? Supposedly. But the whole idea of how is a child going to communicate what they're feeling if what they're feeling is not within the typical parameters, is part of the problem. That number one, that there's a wrong answer to how someone's feeling, and number two, that they shouldn't communicate it. Talk a little bit about, now I understand that I can see why it's been kind of a whirlwind, because you also nailed it by saying, yeah, but there has been a tremendous amount of preparation and investment that's gone into that result. And that's often how it is with entrepreneurs, with, innovators, disruptors, anybody who thinks differently. It's usually a ton of resistance and then a watershed, hopefully a watershed moment. But what was the journey like? So you said you were 8. You were 8 when you suffered that loss. And, so what was that road like into, because I understand that, you obviously you went up against some educators who didn't read the teacher's manual, whatever it was. But what was in your mind as you were kind of wrestling with those barriers through, junior high, high school?
So I want to be honest, and I just apologize to anyone if this is too real for me to say. A lot of it was just terror. I've learned, I've talked to a lot of youth, I realize how common this is. A lot of the time when people are angry or, quote unquote, acting out, which is
Mm-hmm.
a term that I have my own frustration with, there are underlying motions of fear, of anxiety, of worry in a lot of scenarios. Sometimes it's anger. But one of the things I was taught when it comes to communication, based on some of the people I knew, certain family members, I'm not going to name names just out of respect, but I think a lot of youth are taught just to be angry when they're scared, or they're taught to yell. They're like, these are subliminal things that are taught through society. And like a lot of media teaches youth, like, it's okay to hit someone if it's the right reason. But
Yeah.
myself, like with many youth, a lot of it was worry and fear and frustration that I experienced on a larger basis, trying to communicate something that was going on inside of me, and having teachers and adults and students get mad at me and respond in anger. Some of the barriers were simply that I had a reputation at that point of
Yeah.
being disruptive and angry. And it's very easy for youth to match a reputation versus, like, if there is an adult who has an expectation of youth and that expectation is a reputation, then a lot of youth are going to line up with that reputation. But the other thing that really hit me was just the overall sadness, like having that desire to want to succeed, but being so often met with just like frustration and anger and like leftover hostility that other people couldn't let go, or their own very complex emotions. And I know as a youth, my internal narrative really early into my life became I was a monster. I was horrible. I was a problem because so many people and authority were telling me that. It's one of the reasons I tell people we have to be really careful with what we say around youth, because even if we don't think they hear us, all it can, like one off the cuff comment can stick with someone for years. And I think that goes even more true for authority figures, especially if you feel like you can trust that person at one point, which is also something else that I very much dealt with.
Yeah. Also, when we're, whether we want to call it this or not, as children, we're being trained.
Mm-hmm.
We're being trained. And, you know, uh, I took a course in, it actually was more of a like sales type of course, but of course there's a lot of psychology involved, and it's a lot of it is ourselves, not other people, not the customer or whatever it might be. We think, oh, I'm terrible at selling. I'm not good at selling. I can't sell items. I don't like selling, or whatever it is. And it's, and the example that the instructor was using was, if as a child you're told you're not good at something, you're just going to take their word for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite possible. Like your mom might say, "Oh, you're not good at selling things." Just like you're not good at selling things, and then everything you operate on from that moment can be, "I'm not good at selling things,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm going to do this." Now it can work the other way. Oh, you're brilliantly creative. Oh, wow, I'm brilliantly creative. But the limiting beliefs can be instilled in one pivotal moment, in
Mhm.
one moment that child remembers. And by the same token, if you learn to avoid that as a parent, let's say, and you learn not to say that, well, try again. Who knows? You may be great at it. Try again. You know, these frustrations. I think what I'm getting at is, when we talk about, and I want you to talk a little bit about sensory friendly events, but when we're on the one hand, we're talking about considerations for the child. On the other hand, we have to learn, if we're the adult, let's say, or we're the peer, we have to learn how to manage our frustrations, our limitations, because so much of it is that we don't have patience. No one has patience. We think we don't have patience, right? And we think that that's okay. So, what's your outlook when it comes to not just creating environments that are healthy and sensory friendly, but somehow improving our humanity as a whole?
So I think one of the fundamental aspects of creating like a sensory space, and I realize every time I use this word, I think a lot of people are going to roll their eyes, but I always like to use the word energy. And the reason I use that is because it's not like necessarily like putting it out in the world like vibes literally coming off of someone, but it might as well be, right? When someone shows up to a sensory space, when someone shows up to an event, especially if they're neurodiverse or if it's a group of adults, like you said, who are having frustrated problems with temper, one of the easiest ways to make that spiral out of control is to lose yourself in it. And what I mean by that is making sure that you are anxious, people will pick up on anxious. Making sure you are angry, people will pick up on the anger. And I've spent a lifetime, and I still do this every day. I practice this every day, but like the energy I put out in the world, the kindness I show people, the tone of my voice, how I respond to conflict, even at the like if it's Dungeons and Dragons, which I help with at the table, all of these things are a factor. If I'm walking up to a stranger, that is a factor. Um, and at sensory friendly events, like we have to think about our behavior, our mindset, our attitude, our body language. And I understand that there's this idea that all of these are evolving to match like the neurodiverse and mental health community. But if I like I kind of boil it down, if I were to show up, my energy was like I was bouncing off the wall. My voice was extremely loud. The majority of the people I work with, or many people, would be completely turned off and would immediately walk out the door. And I view it the same way with behavior. Like, it's so important to be able to handle things in a calm, rational manner. And really quickly touching on like people's temper, a lot of people are shamed by their actions when they're angry. Sometimes shame is incredibly necessary, but one of the things I found is a lot of us don't have a good handle on shame. So then, like,
Mm,
someone does something, if I were to respond and then, like, drill down on the, like, you did this, this, and this is why it's bad. This is what you should do. And then I added 3 or 4 more layers of that. What that's going to do, like you said, it's going to train someone, but it's also just going to make those feelings of anger get buried down deep below. And I think one of the things we really, as people, have to do better about is finding cathartic and healing ways to get past our emotions versus like, I think so many of us are taught to just bury it down below and let it fester. So that's
yeah.
some insight.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, that again is a burying emotion.
Mhm.
The roles that have been foisted upon us, foisted upon ourselves. I mean, I always think it's important to, like, if there's blame to be had, it's like I say, it's our own species. It's not like, we can't blame a society of which we are a part, just because maybe it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago. We have to evolve as a species to become more empathetic, to become more sensitive, and to share our vulnerabilities in a way that doesn't jeopardize us. And in the business world, I recognize that sharing vulnerability is not, it's not a fail-safe. There's a risk to that,
Mhm.
and that's where some of the bravery comes in. Tell us what you're working on now. What's on your plate.
So right now, so I am actually working on expanding my reach a little bit just to help. But part of what that means is new programs, new classes. So I teach on Skillshare, just landed an educational course. So I have a new class planned for Udemy. I don't know if I ever pronounced that right. I
I
very
think it's you, Demi, but I don't know.
Udemy. Okay. I'm also working on launching an empathic storytelling class on Skillshare. I am working really hard as well to develop new programs for the community, building connections with organizations like at storytelling events, going out a big more. I'm really excited for a couple conventions that I have in October. I one of my primary critiques I get from a lot of people is, are you sure you can handle all of that? And I always appreciate it, but it's part of why one of my big goals in the future is to get better about drawing boundaries.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that brings up a good question, which is, are there other people involved in the programs of storytelling, like other instructors or guest instructors, or what does that ecosystem look like?
so right now, so I've actually just started working. One person I am mentoring on doing this work. I'll be honest with you, within the ecosystem of the work that I particularly do, there's not a lot of people doing it right now. Like I do a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and there's more and more people trying to do that within the Neuro-diverse community. But within the realm of like the educational aspects I do with it, the skill building, as well as storytelling in general, right now it's kind of this Wild West situation where there's need that's being met, but so many people just haven't heard of it or
Yeah.
haven't had conversations. And for me, that's really cool. I get to view myself kind of at a forefront of something that is moving and changing. And I'll be honest, most people I talk to find it absolutely fascinating,
Yeah.
but there are so few people in this that are doing it now. And I think we need to have so many more doing the work.
What would the profile be for people who should maybe even people who are listening or interested in the topic that might want to explore being a part of this?
So I always try to preface part of it with this. I'm going to be honest with you. This is not the work you do to become rich and famous. Like this is
Yeah.
this is hard work. This is a lot of effort. I know Dungeons and Dragons is growing more and more popularity, but I would definitely say like things that help make this work better. I would say first thing is you got to be able to remove the ego. Like you've got to be able to take input. You've got to be able to look beyond yourself, practice empathy, as well as storytellers in this field can have experience with business. They can have experience working with youth, as well as like one of the biggest things is a genuine childlike sense of creativity. And I don't think that is something that you're either born with or you're born without. Human beings, in my general experience, crave creativity. It's why TV shows are so big. It's why
Sure.
movies are so big. Um, but if you're willing to invest in the creativity and willing to learn, which is another massive thing, and adopt what you know and add to it, then I think you probably have a pretty solid background because every day, like I either work with someone new or I have a challenge that makes me realize that my own knowledge after doing this, like working with a neurodiverse community for over 12 years and now doing this, like every day I realize I have something new to learn.
Yeah. And I'm just making a note of this, but I was thinking that it's kind of like reclaiming In some ways, your alpha state, you're reclaiming your innocence and your ability to dream and imagine,
Mm-hmm.
because it is true, like you say, everybody's born with it.
Mm-hmm.
What I think happens quite often is that the people who go on to create entertainment stories, things like that, simply held on to that ability, but didn't relinquish it, or it was stronger with the force was stronger within them, but I think that that's something that people should get in touch with. Let's close with, I'll give you the last word. Let us know where people can find you, but then also maybe share a final thought for people who might be listening.
Definitely. So the first thing I always like to highlight is I like to give out my business email, which is ndttrpg@gmail. I can make sure there's a link provided.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. Part of the reason I like doing that is I love questions. I love when people ask questions. I love it when people have the courage to do that. The next thing, I have my website, rhcreativeadvocacyandstorytelling.net. I always say I never realized how long that was when I made my website. But the other major thing is I'll make sure my link tree is provided because that'll have a full list of everything. But I'm also on LinkedIn. I need to get better about posting on there, but there are different insights, events, and things that I post on there that I don't always share on other social media. And my last thought, oh, there's so many that I could say, but I'm going to have to say, if you want to do this work, if you want to get started, even if you don't want to work with youth or you want to have those boundaries, the first step to most things really is just having the genuine willingness to try. If you're not willing to do something, you will not do something. Like, many people believe that, but there is such a truth to genuine willingness. And even if this isn't the specific work that you're meant to be working in, doesn't mean that you can't succeed in another facet of the creative world. I know the world likes to pigeonhole us into roles, but just because one person succeeds doesn't mean you are, but that doesn't mean you have something great that you can be doing in the world.
Thanks so much for tuning into Truth Tastes Funny. If you enjoyed the experience, please leave a 5-star review and share this podcast with your friends.